Back here on the show to continue talking about the NFL draft just a day away now from the first round starting. We're going to focus on the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that has been known, has a reputation of moving all over the draft, talking Howie Roseman and all his activities, trying to do the most, it seems, always trying to move up, trying to improve this team any way he can. And it has become almost like a tradition at this point for him to try and make a move. You saw it with A.J. Brown in recent years. Just in the last 5 drafts, he's moved up, traded up, and selected players like Andre Dillard in 2019, moved up to draft Devontae Smith, Jordan Davis in 2022, and most recently Jalen Carter in 2023. 4 out of the last 5 drafts, he has moved up. So it is just normal to think he would try and do that again here in this draft, and that's what ESPN's Adam Schefter claims to be the case once again with Howie Roseman. Could be one of the most aggressive teams to move up in pursuing a deal, were Adam Schefter's words. One report that has gained the most momentum revolves around the Eagles trying to trade up to draft a defensive back. That's what Adam Schefter claims, and specifically in his last report on all the notes he has gained up to this point on the draft, he said, if Roseman wants a cornerback at number 22, as many people around the league would believe he might have to move up again. Per sources, he already has been calling around, gouging what a trade might look like to be prepared for what has become a near annual tradition. Also mentioned that Howie Roseman has never actually drafted a defensive back, running back, tight end, or safety ever in the first round. He has been the general manager since 2010, and just off of that information, thinking about it, with all the movement, it is pretty crazy to think he has never drafted those positions, and now could be the first time, with the focus seeming to be on defensive back. I mentioned all the moves they've made before and how that could affect it, and you look at the defensive backs, that's another position in this class that is of low quantity in the first round, just because, at least to me, in my evaluation, in my opinion on these draft picks, you really have 2 that I would class as must-have, immediate starters, immediate contributors. That's Alabama's Terrion Arnold and Toledo's Quinyon Mitchell. Terrion Arnold, very solid season for Alabama, and Quinyon Mitchell, a senior, had a good season, not as many favorable stats as Terrion Arnold, but he had a very solid pro day, very good combine as well. He tested great, and now they're seemingly looked at as a 1A, 1B sort of positions at, or players in that position. You can't really go wrong with either of them. About the same measurements and height, weight, and all that stuff. Both ran very good 40s. They match up very well with each other, so those are really the ones that have stuck out and separated themselves more so than any other one, I believe, over this part of the offseason. And it makes sense why Howie Roseman would want to go after a defensive back now, because you look at their secondary, you look at what they've addressed so far, right, in the offseason. Offense, Saquon Barkley tying down Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson. Jalen Hurts is signed through 2028, 2027. Devontae Smith also received a new deal. You have everything on offense to move forward, so you've locked that down. Looking now further at that defense, how does that stack up? How much better has it gotten since last year, where that was the clear deficiency of the entire team? Couldn't really stop the run against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and really just failing to live up to the defense that we saw a year prior to that when they made their Super Bowl run. Of course, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham got older, but it really wasn't the units up front that caused any doubt or anything like that. It was mostly a lot coming in the back end from a lack of good safety play. They had Reed Blankenship back there. He was a solid piece, but to me, it was a bit too early for him to make an impact. You look at Darius Slay, solid, probably their best secondary player. And you look at the other side, and James Bradberry was one of the biggest culprits, one of the biggest receivers of a lot of criticism by a lot of fans, a lot of people that watch the game. The two biggest games that stand out to me were the Seahawks game. If you remember, Seahawks, Eagles in a close game. I want to say it was Monday Night Football, and the Seahawks were trailing. They were on a game-winning drive. They were trying to win the game, and a lot of those throws went James Bradberry's direction, most notably the game-winning touchdown, over-the-shoulder catch to Jackson Smith and Jigba on James Bradberry, and they targeted him a lot during that drive. That was a bad look, but as a corner, the saying is always, short memory, forget about plays, because those are going to happen, right? But it just never seemed to, for all the bad performances, bad looks Bradberry got, he never had great performances, a great interception, a great tackle, or really anything to kind of contemplate or kind of trying to erase those negative plays with some bad plays, kind of offset them. Those never really came, as opposed to when they did, when they made the Super Bowl run. It was just a rough season up and down for Bradberry and that secondary overall. And you look at them as well, Bradberry and Darius Slay are both 30 years old or older. So that, again, doesn't play into your favor. You look at everybody else that you have in there, Eli Ricks, Kelly Ringo, all younger guys. And sure, they can get better, but just from what you saw last year, you're not really too confident in what they could bring this next year because they don't have any momentum going. They didn't finish off the year strong. They didn't really make any wow plays, so they don't have much to really build off of. And it's kind of like, not to say that the first year was a waste, because they certainly learned some things off the field that are helpful, but on the field, it's not something that they gained a ton of experience with and can build off of. They're almost starting from a similar position to a rookie if you were to draft them in now, which is what they're planning to do. So sure, you can get a bigger talent, a greater talent than those other guys who weren't drafted in the first round, but it's going to be almost a similar stance on starting some of these younger guys anyway. You don't really know what you have in them up till now, so it looks like the Eagles are dead set on trying to improve that secondary. There are some other options out there as well, with these young pieces being the alternatives to Darius Slay and Bradberry. You could go out and try and test your luck with a Justin Simmons if you want another player back there. I know they just got C.J. Gardner-Johnson back, but he could be a guy that you could sign for a year or two. Of course, you look back at the Kevin Byard deal that didn't work out. Similar circumstance, similar situation to what I'm proposing, but you have such a young secondary that, yeah, one situation turned out bad with Byard, but you can't assume that that's just going to happen again. I think Justin Simmons at this point is a little bit better, has a higher ceiling than Kevin Byard right now at his point in his career. And if you sign him for a year or two on a cheaper deal, which is the biggest point because Justin Simmons has a very expensive contract, if you could get it lowered down and bring him in, I think that'll certainly help. Stephon Gilmore is still out there, another veteran option. So you'd think, why would you go out and get an older player if Bradberry and Darius Slay are also over 30? That's a good point, but again, I think it would be a good transition is what I'm basically trying to say, which is my biggest point. Bringing in another veteran guy, again, for a year or two, having these younger players spot them here or there, gain some more experience. Because they didn't see so much of the field last year, I think could really benefit this team to improve with the veteran guys coming in for a little bit, then moving on from them, then transitioning into some of these younger guys with more experience. I think that's a route that they could explore, and if they decide to go through with this trade and move up that far and get one of these corners, who, if I had to pick, if I'm Howie Roseman, right, and I make the trade, I'm feeling good. I'm up there. At one of these picks from 12 with the Broncos, or as far as 13 or 14, I would assume. If I'm picking, who am I taking? I would probably take Terrion Arnold if I had to pick between one of them. I think his game's a bit more polished. I think he moves in and out of his cuts, of his breaks a bit easier, in my opinion, than Quinyon Mitchell. I also think he just has, in simple terms, layman's terms, I think catching the ball, I think he's a lot more secure with it, more prone to actually completing a turnover, which is important. Quinyon Mitchell gets in those spots, but a lot of times it'll be a swat or not finishing a turnover. And I don't want to get too technical, but shadowing a receiver, following him on all his cuts, and just reading him, I think Terrion Arnold has a bit higher of a ceiling than Quinyon Mitchell. But I do share the feeling that, it's really 1A, 1B. It's your preference. I think Quinyon Mitchell would be better suited in a lot heavier zone coverage scheme than man, like Terrion Arnold would. And because the Eagles run so much man, because they want to have a lot of people up there in the box, they want to rush the quarterback, I think Terrion Arnold would be a better fit in Philadelphia running those zero-back, one-on-one man coverage. I think he would do a little bit better there. That's just what I feel like. And in terms of finding a trade partner, it gets interesting because to me, the three biggest candidates are the Broncos, the Raiders, and then just a little bit further down are the Colts and the Saints. It's interesting, these teams to look into, because for Indianapolis, their general manager, Chris Ballard, is known to want to accumulate draft picks and have a better opportunity with them, get more players with them. Obviously, that makes sense. More draft picks, you have more chance to draft better players. So that one could be interesting, but then you think, is that a bit too late at 15? Would Quinyon Mitchell be gone? And then at that point, you might have to trade back to where you were or trade even further away. Something to consider. Same thing with the Saints. I think that just might be a little bit too late. The sweet spot falls with the Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. But with both of them, you have to consider the Raiders, first of all. They might need a corner as well. They desperately need one, opposite of Jack Jones. They don't really have too many options, so I'm sure they're going to be thinking, if one of them is there, drafting one of them. But they also need an offensive tackle. Which position do you value more? That comes down to Tom Telesco, Antonio Pierce, and what they want to do. If they trade up, that also changes everything. So they're an interesting team that I just think you have to wait and see how the top 10, how the top 8, fall, and how it all lines up before you try and reach out to them. And with the Denver Broncos, another one that is probably the most likely situation because they need a lot of players. They don't have a lot of draft picks. Those two things don't line up. The Eagles have 2 second-round draft picks and plus their first-round draft pick. A lot of capital they could offer the Broncos. It would make the most sense, but people would connect the Broncos to Bo Nix, to Michael Penix perhaps. They just signed Zach Wilson, and I mentioned it yesterday. With Zach Wilson, I think it's in their best interest to try him out and see what you got. But, Sean Payton, what they're thinking over there with their general manager, George Patton, and everything. Do they still go out there? I'm going to talk about it more in the next segment. But to wrap up this one, I think it would just make the most sense for the Broncos there to go out and make that trade. It'll sting because you don't know what you have in Zach Wilson, but if you get, say, the Eagles' first-round pick and maybe 1 or 2 of their second-round picks, I think it's a no-brainer for what the value you're getting back, and it'll speed up this rebuilding process you're in. I think they're the most suitable trade partner, but again, it all depends on really how the top 4 fall out, how everything lines up. It's in their best interest, and if they can get a fair deal, I'm sure the Broncos would do it. The Eagles would want to do it anyway, so that's something to watch out for tomorrow night as the draft goes along. But in the meantime, we will move on to the final segment, the final break of the show as well. And we'll be back in a few seconds to talk about Bo Nix and Michael Penix. A lot of attention has gone to the top 4, but these two could make a certain impact depending on where they fall. It just depends on who's going to draft them. I'm going to let you know more on what's being said after this break, so don't go anywhere. More to come on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.